Tilde. In before MTV falsely DMCA this video because they don't enjoy my criticism of it. They've done it before, so who's to say they won't do it again? My only hope is that by drawing attention to it immediately in the beginning of this video, it may very well encourage them to hold fire on falsely DMCAing this video, lest they prove my point. And then we all get to point and laugh at them for not being able to take criticism. Anyway, on with the show.
This is an actual thing a white person can buy.
That pretty much sums up this entire video in a nutshell. And even though this is your ridiculous preamble designed to get people into your clickbaity nonsense, I'm still going to prove it wrong anyway. So I went on to Amazon.com to try and find myself one of these gun mugs. Couldn't help but notice that there isn't a little checkbox above Add to Cart that says, please confirm you are white to enable option to purchase. It's almost like anyone of any ethnicity can buy this product.
As a person of color, there's actually a huge array of products and activities that are just not for you.
It's a white world, and we get to live in it.
So it's a white world out there, and you get to live in it. Well, I have some data that might just shock you a little bit. The next short segment I have had to screen capture using OBS, and for some reason OBS doesn't play friendly with my audio software. So there may be a little bit of distortion on my voice when I'm speaking for the next few minutes. Apologies for that. Okay, so it's a white world out there. Or is it really? Here's an interesting website for you. It's called prb.org. What this does is it tracks the world's population and gives you a nice digital visualization for the year 2014 and beyond. And we're going to play around with this a little bit because I think this is going to prove to you just how white the world really is. Let's scroll on down, shall we? So here are a couple of interactive graphs that you can play around with, showing you the world population. Now, we're not going to concern ourselves with this chart on the right here, because as you can see, this is a projection for 2050. What we're concerning ourselves with is the chart here for 2014, last year, or maybe 2 years ago if you're watching this in 2016. Hello there, people from the future. Yes, feel free to cringe at that horrendous joke. What you're going to notice almost immediately, well, look at that Asian population. 4.4 billion of the population of the planet, which is 7.2 billion. i.e., more than half of the population of the world is Asian. And you may notice there is a very goodly proportion here, 1.4 billion from China. Now, the Asian statistic here is a little bit skewed because it includes not only East Asians, such as Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, so on and so forth, but it also includes countries from the south of Asia and the Middle East. So we have India represented here. There are places such as Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, all sort of more Middle Eastern places that are represented here. So if you wanted to sort of break this down on an ethnic line, which you seem to want to, you could probably more or less halve this and have half as, say, Oriental and the other half as, say, Middle Eastern. But going from this, with 4.4 billion people being so-called Asian, in reality, it's a very, very yellow and brown world. So I find it kind of entertaining that we have an Asian person telling us how white the world is. Now let's turn our attention to the upper quadrant here, shall we? Europe, and the first interesting thing which I'd like to point out to you about the European statistic here is that it actually includes Russia as well, which is quite interesting. So Russia you'd normally think would be put into Asia, but Russia being considered European is fair enough if we're trying to break this down by race, because Russia is majoritarily white, of course. So we have Europe here, 740 million. North America, 350 million, and Oceania, 38 million. Now, what I'd like to do here is simply compare this to Africa of 1.1 billion. Now, if we do a little bit of rough maths, 740, 350, 83, maybe 1.2 billion. So there's maybe a population of about 1.2 billion people living in the white countries. Now, if we made the erroneous assumption that 100% of the population of Europe, North America, and Oceania is white, that means that there would be about an equal number of black to white people living in the world. This, however, is not actually the case because, as we know, Europe, North America, Oceania are far more multicultural than Africa, often with only some 80 to 90% of their population actually being white. So, in reality, there's more black people living in Africa alone than there are white people living in the entirety of Europe, the entirety of North America, and the entirety of Oceania put together. And obviously, we're not going to include the Latina and Caribbeans in the count for white people because they are often separated into their own unique Latino or Latina categories when we're looking at things divided by ethnicity. So I just find it very interesting that we have an Asian man who could very well be Chinese. I'm not entirely sure if he is, but if you are Chinese, then that just adds so much sweet irony to what you're saying. Yes, it's a white world where Chinese people are the overwhelming majority. But it's a white world where white people, i.e. Europeans, North Americans, and Oceanians, are actually the minority of the population, along with the Latin population. But you go ahead and tell us just how white that world around you really is.
You basically won, like, the racial lottery with that lack of melanin.
If by that you mean they won the lottery because winners are, of course, the minority of people who play, then you would be correct. But I don't think that's where you're going with this.
Here's a few things white people take for granted.
Like flesh-colored band-aids that actually resemble flesh.
Okay, this one annoys me for numerous reasons. First of all, the point of any sort of medical dressing is that it is supposed to cover a wound. You need to ensure that the wound stays closed so that it can heal, and also that the wound does not get dirt into it so that it becomes infected while it's attempting to heal. This is why the overwhelming majority of hospital dressings are white, because blood rising out of the wound to stain the dressing will be very obvious. Dirt build up on the outside of the dressing will also be very obvious. This means that you can tell if there is something wrong, or you can simply tell if the dressing needs to be replaced with a new, clean one. If the dressing was, say, black, or brown, or dark red, you wouldn't be able to tell this as easily. Which means if the wound underneath the dressing reopened and was bleeding, or if the dressing itself had become encrusted with dirt, increasing the likelihood of infection of the wound, that would be a problem, because you wouldn't be able to tell as easily. This is therefore not an issue of race, this is an issue of enabling hygiene. Secondly, if your wound is so small that it can be covered and treated with a plaster, then it is not a particularly serious wound. In other words, it's often not a wound that you're going to have to worry about spontaneously ripping itself open and you bleeding to death because of it. Because if it's small enough to be covered by a plaster, it's often small enough to close itself within a matter of hours. The fact that a plaster is used in situations that are frankly in no way emergencies is why they are available in a wide variety of styles, with numerous kinds of patterns available on them. In some cases to make them more child-friendly, or just to stop them from being bland. The fact that the majority of them are beige or white is nothing to do with Caucasian skin or trying to appeal to white people. It is because of the medical function that they serve. Take, for instance, catering plasters. These are plasters that are designed to be worn in food preparation areas if you cut yourself with, say, a knife in a kitchen. These plasters are often blue. The reason being that if you are doing something, your plaster comes off and falls into, say, a pot of soup or a pot of stew, contaminating it, it is much easier to see something that is blue instead of beige. Thus, the colour of the dressing is appropriate to the environment that it is in. Once again, nothing to do with race, nothing to do with white people trying to keep the black man down. It is simple functionality. You are simply trying to turn this into a racist issue when it is not one. And if all of that wasn't a good enough explanation, you do realise that there are companies out there who do produce a variety of skin tone plasters, right? Just for those people like you for whom it really matters for some reason.
This is a nude bra.
I don't even think I know white people that are this color.
Now, I find the nude colour debate to be quite hilarious because this is a problem of your own making. Nude is actually a colour in its own right. It was best described by Naeem Khan, who states that nude in fashion is often used to describe a colour that is a shade a little darker than champagne, lighter than sand, and perhaps with a hint of blush or peach. So it's a kind of slightly pinkish off-beige colour, and nude just happens to be the word used to describe that colour, in the same way that a pinkish orange kind of colour is often referred to as salmon. The entire nude debate has been caused by people like you who have been drawing on this idea that the word nude is instantly referring to someone's flesh colour, and that is the flesh colour of white people. This is an issue of your own fabrication. And because people like you have shouted about it and turned it into a racial issue when it isn't, the term nude has now been altered to include a wide variety of colours in such a spectrum that nobody actually knows what the term nude means anymore in relation to colour.
This is the darkest I could find.
You clearly didn't look very hard then. From L'Oreal-Paris-USA.com. True Match Foundation Makeup. For people with warm skin tones ranging from porcelain to deep golden, neutral skin tones of soft ivory to mahogany, and for cool skin tones of alabaster all the way to espresso. And every single one of those images will take you to a page that shows you all the products that L'Oreal does that matches your skin complexion. You are attempting to chastise society because you suck at shopping. Just because you are too stupid to find these products for yourself, that does not mean that society is somehow exclusively catering to white people, or that society somehow hates people who are not white.
I flunked out of algebra twice, and everyone was shocked. That's racist.
First of all, was it really everyone who was just so surprised that you failed at algebra? Or was it just one person? And were they in fact just making a joke? Second of all, do white people really get to take it for granted that they suck at algebra? No. Being white does not mean that you can be bad at algebra and still pass.
White people can change their hair, and surprisingly, no one feels the need to touch it.
Yeah, black people can change their hair as well, and no one necessarily feels a need to touch that. But there are situations in which this can be a two-way street. White people who are on humanitarian missions to third world countries, where the predominant hair texture is more the Afro-Caribbean curly texture, will sometimes have that done to them as well, because it's something new, it's something different, it's something that they've not experienced before. You can hardly be surprised that people are curious about things that they've not necessarily encountered before. So this isn't so much a white people, black people issue as this is a simple issue of demographics and exposure. And I can pretty much guarantee you that you, as a black person living in the Western world, will experience this at a far lower frequency than a white person who goes to the deepest, darkest jungles in the Congo where a white person has never been seen. And also, have you ever considered white people who choose to style their hair in, say, dreadlocks? Sometimes people will be curious. Again, this is not a matter of ethnicity.
They just creep in real slow and I'll be like, nope, what? I'm doing Bruce Lee karate up in here.
Yeah, no, I call bullshit. I really can't ever imagine a situation where you have, say, a dozen people trying to dogpile you in order to stroke your hair. Maybe this happened once on a bus or on the train where a child walked up to you and just did it. But this just smacks of needless exaggeration. Also, you doing karate is cultural appropriation, you racist, oppressive shitlord.
Another thing that white people totally take for granted, they can own gun-shaped things.
This is a gun-shaped flash drive.
Gun-shaped knives? It's already a knife. Why is it shaped like a gun?
Like if I point at it, see, that's weird. Like that, I could tell that was uncomfortable for us.
I would totally get shot if I was just putting this right into my MacBook Air.
You do realize that all of you can buy any of those items. You can own any of those items, right? There is nothing stopping any of you from having those things or using those things other than your own paranoia. This is an absolute non-point.
And white people get to be on money, as if we don't see their faces everywhere else.
Sounds like you've got a problem with seeing white people. You sure you're not racist?
They call them dead presidents, but some of these guys are just dead white guys. Like this guy? Who is that? President number... nothing.
That would be Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the United States, and the first Secretary of the Treasury. He basically single-handedly dealt with the entirety of the financial situation of the United States. That's why his face and the Treasury building is depicted on the $10 bill. Seems to me that the person who basically created the entire financial system that you're using being recognized on the money, that seems like a fairly legitimate thing, don't you think?
All we have is a Sacagawea coin.
It was a big splash, and then it slowly started disappearing, much like the Native American population.
Okay, this sort of argument just irks me. The reason that people are depicted on banknotes is because they usually did something of great importance to the nation, or they may simply be that nation's head of state. Because of these two facts, it is entirely reasonable that in Western countries, where the overwhelming majority of their populations throughout the entirety of their history have been white, that the people who feature on their banknotes are going to be white. Unsurprisingly, because all of their heads of state have been white, and all of the people who built the infrastructure of those countries as they currently stand have been white. Let's now look at some of the more interesting banknotes from other countries. Let's start with the banknotes of the African country Cameroon, from atsnotes.com. Well, would you look at that? There's no white folks on that money. It's all notable black people from Cameroon's history, or scenes of things that are relevant to that country's history or economic infrastructure. Interesting. Now let us consider some banknotes from Nigeria. Oh, interesting. It's the same thing. Their currency is covered with black people. I wish I could say I was surprised. I wonder what the money looks like in the Asian country of Korea. Are you getting the message yet? The people on the money of the country that you are in reflect that country's history. Deal with it.
Wizards, dwarves, elves. Not one single Korean in the whole film.
There's room to throw in, like, I don't know, a Latino hobbit. It would be fun. Their cuisine would be so much more dynamic.
You are aware that Lord of the Rings is based on European medieval civilization, right? That's why the majority of the cast are basically white people. But then what you rather conveniently do is ignore the fact that even within all of those white people, there are quite notably different cultures, which are based very heavily on different cultures throughout Europe, and indeed from further afield. So let's build this from the ground up, shall we? The Hobbits are distinctly based on rural British life, with places such as the Shire being inspired by places in Britain such as Warwickshire, Gloucester, and Sarehole just outside of Birmingham. This is why hobbits are often portrayed as overly polite, waistcoat-wearing, quintessentially British people who enjoy a very slow, calm pace of life. The lands and peoples of Gondor and Rohan were very distinctly modelled after the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Mercia, again from the Midlands, which is why they all live in the fairly stereotypical medieval feudal system. The dwarves are a very curious part of Tolkien's works, being very heavily inspired by Jewish history and Jewish culture. First of all, their language is based very heavily on the Hebrew language, and then they are a race of craftsmen exiled from an especially bountiful homeland, a race of wanderers who develop a language of their own to use internally and also adopt the tongue of whatever nation they're in, remembering a traumatic past with mournful songs, commemorating the loss and exile from their homeland, and even the story of the Hobbit with the Arkenstone. Some say that this represents the story of the Ark of the Covenant, with the Lonely Mountain standing in place for Jerusalem's Temple Mount. And then, as with the Old Testament's later Jewish kings, the dwarf kings of Erebor prove to be corruptible and gold-obsessed, which leads them into conflict with their neighbours, represented by, for instance, the dragon Smaug. There's even more subtle references to Jewish culture throughout Tolkien's works in regards to the dwarves. Subtle little things like the mention of the dwarves having a death rite where they would tear their beards out as a sign of mourning, in line with a Jewish custom of tearing your clothes to express grief. The inspiration is quite clear and apparent. And to get specifically onto your point that there were no Koreans in Tolkien's work. Actually, there were. They were a race known as the Easterlings. They are described as short and swarthy with sallow or yellow olive skin with dark brown or black very straight hair and eyes, and even more subtle references to them being the feared horsemen of the steppes, an almost certain reference to the Mongolian horse armies of Genghis Khan. And there is even reference to them massively outnumbering the Western people, which is very interesting in light of the graph that we saw at the start of this video. So Oriental or Asian people were certainly very present in Tolkien's universe. It's simply that he may never have written a story based specifically around them. Seriously, do you even Tolkien? And I'd just like to have a final little dig at that last thing that woman said. The idea that, oh, if they had a Latino hobbit, their cuisine would be so much more dynamic, in your subjective opinion. But it's nice to know that you have just completely belittled the cuisine and culture of the Western world, Britain specifically. But hey, implied inferiority is fine, because it's aimed at white people, right?
White people can have full-length arguments with cops. Are you out of your mind? Did you not see me out the light, you crazy son of a...
And you can have a full-length argument with a cop. I'm pretty sure that if you get mouthy at a police officer, no matter your ethnicity, you're going to get arrested. Unless, of course, you're implying that there is some sort of difference of outcome between white people and black people, at which point I'm just going to say, citation needed. Your implied assertion doesn't count.
I knew a dude who messed up a handshake Spanish guy, had to move out of the neighborhood. That didn't really happen, but it sounds like it could have.
Well, at least you've acknowledged that you're bullshitting now.
This is comfortable. No one's gonna shoot me.
Yeah, no one's gonna shoot you either. I'm pretty sure that not a single black person has ever been shot by the police because they were wearing a hoodie. There is always going to have been something else going on at the same time. If this is seriously the crux of your point, then it's fucking weak.
Indian is not a language.
Okay, so you can take it for granted that you only know one language. This only works when the only language you know how to speak is the language spoken by the majority of people in the country that you live in. If you can only speak English and you go to, say, Vietnam, it might be a bit difficult for you. If you can only speak, say, Japanese and you move to France, that will be difficult for you. This is an absolute non-point. Everyone takes their own native language for granted when they're living in their own native country. This is not a white thing.
Charming when they look stupid.
Except for the times when it's not, and they are mocked and derided for it. People make fun of bad dancers all the time, regardless of their ethnicity. This is not a white thing. It's not necessarily charming that someone is a bad dancer. It's more charming when they are bad at dancing and they basically say, hey, look how bad I am at dancing, exaggerate how bad they are, and then that can be quite a charming and endearing thing because it shows that they don't mind being laughed at for not having a talent and they turn it into a joke, they make it funny, and that is an endearing trait to have, the ability to laugh at oneself. And this is not a white thing. There is nothing racial about this in any capacity at all.
This is what privilege looks like on a white person.
No, that's what permanent virginity looks like on anyone.
Are you a white person that takes things for granted?
Do you take things for granted? Do you, say, take for granted your ability to generalize and disparage an entire group of people based on nothing but their skin color, as you are about to do, and know that you will be able to get away with it because of your skin color?
Do you feel like this video took you for granted? Leave us a gun-shaped comment below. Don't worry, we'll know who it's from.
I really hope that your entire comment section now gets absolutely flooded with gun-shape assy art. Although you'll probably say that that's racist because it's the internet equivalent of burning a cross on your lawn.